when Taymor came over to pick up Mark from his house at his mother's house, Mark went outside with his backpack and his camera, very definable white type camera, ran off to this car down the street, a black Kia. Little did he know he was getting into that car and then would be falling off that car later on, shot by this individual that's sitting right over there.
The state can't prove that this was not a justified homicide. The state cannot prove that Mr. McIntyre is the shooter.
To rap fans, you might remember Tay-K. He was up and coming, but his song The Race catapulted him onto the charts. But was it because he was crazy talented? Sure, some might say yes. Or was it because he was arrested and charged with capital murder at just 17? I mean, two things can be true at once, right? I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. Now, really quickly, before we get into this story, I want to announce the launch of our Law&Crime YouTube membership, a new program we launched to give you exclusive perks like custom emojis and badges, along with members-only live streams where you can chat with your favorite Law&Crime hosts and guests. There are 3 levels of membership: armchair detective, amateur attorney, and honorary judge. Each level has different perks that you'll love. So go check out each and choose what works best for you by clicking the link in the description and becoming an official Law&Crime member today. Or click the join button under this video. Now back to this story. Tay-K wasn't charged with just 1 murder, but 2. He was already found guilty in 1 murder case. Now it's up to a Bexar County jury to see if he's guilty in the 2nd case. But to really understand this case, we have to go back years earlier to July of 2016.
The guy on the hood of a car that was driving, and they pulled into the Chick-fil-A parking lot, and the passenger shot his gun at the guy on the hood.
8 years following a deadly shooting at a parking lot in San Antonio, Taymor McIntyre, aka Tay-K, is on trial for murder. But the case has so many layers that you need to understand the background to understand how we got here. I said let's go back to July of 2016 because on that day, the Texas rapper was arrested in connection with a home invasion / robbery / murder. 21-year-old Ethan Walker was killed during the home invasion. Multiple people, including teenagers, were arrested, one of which was Tay-K. He was later released on house arrest. Then he cut off his ankle monitor and fled the Dallas area. Now this is how it ties into this case. So he fled in March of 2017. The following month, 23-year-old Mark Anthony Saldivar was shot and killed at a Chick-fil-A parking lot. Now it's alleged Tay-K was the one behind the gun. We'll get more into the details in this case in just a bit, but it would be months before he was arrested. He eventually fled to New Jersey, and that's where he released his song, The Race, which did make some references to his case. So this was June 16th of 2017. 10 days later, the U.S. Marshals labeled him a violent fugitive because in addition to being connected to a violent robbery where someone was killed and allegedly being the one that pulled the trigger in another case, he was also accused of beating and robbing a 65-year-old at gunpoint. By June 30th of that year, Tay-K released a music video for The Race. It reached the Billboard Hot 100, went viral. But also, it was the day he was arrested in New Jersey. So in June of 2019, he was found guilty of murder and aggravated robbery in the Ethan Walker case. Then in November of that same year, the Bexar County DA's office announced he was indicted on capital murder in the death of Mark Anthony Saldivar. Now, 5 years after the indictment, he's on trial. So now we're hearing more from what prosecutors say happened in April of 2017.
And Mark was excited. He had a rapper that contacted him about doing a photo shoot. Taymor McIntyre, AK-47, or Tay-K, here in San Antonio, Texas. He was excited. His passion was photography. His passion was taking photographs and wanted to make that his career. He was young. He was 20 years old. Taymor McIntyre was almost 17 years old. He was an up-and-coming rapper that contacted Mark about this photo shoot. And when Taymor came over to pick up Mark from his house at his mother's house, Mark went outside with his backpack and his camera, very definable white type camera, ran off to this car down the street, a black Kia. Little did he know he was getting into that car and then would be falling off that car later on, shot by this individual that's sitting right over there.
Prosecutors say Mark was sitting in the back seat and Tay-K was in the front passenger seat. Then all hell broke loose at an intersection.
When they were at this intersection, an altercation began at that point. This man right over here pulled out a gun and turned around and started hitting with fist and also with the gun, telling him, "Give me your stuff, give me your stuff, give me that backpack." They're wrestling for the backpack. At that point, Jalen Bell also wants to get involved in this. He's a bigger guy, a lot bigger than Tay-K. He's in that back seat with Mark. They start beating him and trying to take away his backpack. His passion is in that backpack. His photography, his career. Tay-K gets that backpack away from him. Jalen Bell is still hitting and kicking and pushing Mark. They're at a stoplight. There are people parked around them at that stoplight, witnessing what's going on. Because this happened at 5 o'clock on a Sunday in broad daylight. At some point, Mark gets kicked out of the car. They slam that back door. They won't let him back in the car. "Help, help, help!" He's yelling. What he loved is in that car, his camera. "Give me my things, give me my things." He knows the light's about to turn green. He's frantic. He runs to the front. He jumps on the hood. One of the biggest mistakes of his life, or rather, last part of his life. Joanne Reyes is driving that vehicle. The light turns green. They drive through that stoplight. It's a Sunday afternoon. Right across the street or highway from the North Star Mall, there's a Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. They pull into that Chick-fil-A parking lot. She slams on the brakes. Mark sort of stands up. Looks like he's stomping on the windshield. But then that car jerks and he falls. You'll see that passenger door open up, the front passenger door open up. But this man over here was sitting with that gun. He leans out. He shoots Mark through the shoulder, goes across his body, exits out of his little bit out of his lower back. He falls to the ground. The car reverses and takes off from the scene. You'll see several people run up and try to help Mark. But that bullet crossed his body. It hit his spine, hit his both lungs. If he would have been on the best medical gurney in the world, he wouldn't have survived that shot.
Prosecutors say everyone in the car just left Mark to die in the parking lot. There was no calling 911. Everyone just ran away. But the car they were in was found abandoned not too far away from where Mark was shot and killed.
Tay-K and Jalen take off. They run. They get out of town. Jalen is caught in Dallas. Taymor is caught in New Jersey. Nobody called the cops. Nobody said anything at that point of helping Mark Saldivar. A promising career, possibly photography, a difficult field of photography. You take chances, you do things for nothing. That's what he wanted. He had a chance that day to take some photographs of an up-and-coming rapper that had his career on the horizon, possibly, or wanted it to be that career of a rapper. But instead, that particular day, he chose to take a life of an individual, Mark Saldivar. That's what we will bring to you, and evidence will show that Taymor McIntyre committed capital murder on April 23rd, 2017.
Now, the defense is obviously going to put an argument up. With multiple people in the car that day, you can see where the defense is going to poke holes in the state's argument.
Assumptions and the general guesswork that is attendant to the story that the prosecution just laid out for you should be of deep and troubling concern. There's no dispute that Mark was killed. There's no dispute that he was shot. There's no dispute that there was an altercation in that car. But virtually everything else that the prosecution has laid out for you is going to be told to you through either people who are making a wild guess based upon very, very small fragments of information, the bystanders, for example, on the highway, on the access road where this altercation took place, or it's going to come from people who were in the car. And I want us to stop and consider what that really means in a case like this. Mr. McIntyre is accused of capital murder. You heard yesterday extensive discussion about something called the law of parties, which is the idea that if you are assisting someone in the commission of a crime, either before it happens, while it's going on, or after the fact, you are culpable just the same as the individual who pulled the trigger, the individual who decided to take a life. That's going to be the backbone of this case, is everybody in that car pointing their finger at someone other than themselves. And the state paid to get that information developed, not with money, not with a normal kind of a transaction, but with something that is the most valuable thing a person can trade, their freedom. That's the issue in this case.
The defense argues the reason for the altercation, who sat where in the car, who fired the gun, is essentially going to be a he said, they said, they being the others in the car that day.
The facts and circumstances about where people are seated, who fired the gun, why the gun was fired, all of those are similarly going to come from people with a vested interest in making sure that it doesn't come back on them. And ultimately, all of those things tied together, the way in which this case becomes a charged capital murder against Taymor McIntyre has been spun from the detective's lips to these witnesses' ears and about to be regurgitated back to you just the way the state wanted it, the state paid for it, and the state packaged it. That should be taken with an exceptional amount of scrutiny. And the law in Texas acknowledges that. I expect, after you've heard all the evidence in this case, that you will be charged on something called the accomplice witness rule, which tells you that in Texas, the law requires that the state provide corroborative evidence other than the testimony of an accomplice or a co-conspirator in order to establish guilt. And it is not alone sufficient to convict that corroborative evidence simply prove that a crime occurred. And what the state's going to try and do, I anticipate, is to stack accomplice on top of accomplice on top of accomplice to try and convince you all that that's sufficient to corroborate the offense. Don't let them do it. That's not how the law works. And you all would have to take each of those accomplices as being inherently suspect and recognize that they can't corroborate each other. And what we're left with at the end of that is going to be the actions of law enforcement investigating this case, which, as my colleague, Mr. Goldstein, will explain to you in a moment, were subpar, suboptimal, and not acceptable, especially when we have this kind of a case on the line. The investigation done here was half-hearted, lazy, negligent, dilatory, and ultimately was substituted by reliance on these accomplices as the proof in the pudding, as it were, that a crime was committed. You're also going to hear some evidence about the aspect of the case Mr. Garahan described to you, which is that Mr. Saldivar got on the hood of the car after some altercation took place in the vehicle. That is to say, there will be people that testify who were just on the roadside, that in broad daylight on a Sunday, there was some kind of an altercation in that car. Accounts will differ. Some people describe the individual as an African-American man, young. Some will describe that individual as having a pistol. Some didn't see one. Some will describe that individual as being a Hispanic young man. Some will say that the Hispanic young man had a gun. Some don't. All of those things, I think we have to understand, just are what they are. This happened in the flash of an eye. It happened in a place where you don't normally expect to see something like that. We're talking about Chick-fil-A over on the north side of town across from North Star Mall. not your normal 5 o'clock Sunday activity. And what they saw is what little piece of this overall story they saw. But what seems to be consistently accepted, at least by the lead detective on the case at the end, as he synthesizes all of these little snippets of observation, is that Mark Anthony Saldivar got out of the vehicle, proceeded to argue with the occupants of the vehicle while inside, they're still inside, and then jumped onto the hood of the car and began stomping the windshield of that car. And you'll see the windshield of that car caved in as the result of that activity. You can see where his foot came through, and you can see the rest of it coming through with it. And it is in that context that gunshots are fired. It is in that context that Mr. Saldivar loses his life.
The defense pointed out, yes, there were others in the car. But what do eyewitnesses have to say? Well, one witness who was riding in a completely separate car riding with her family that Sunday describes a violent beatdown happening inside the car.
What did you observe going on in that black motor vehicle?
There was a Mexican that was sitting in the back, getting beat up on by the people that were in the front and in the back, sitting with him.
Okay, and so when you say the Mexican boy that was sitting in the back seat was being beat up on, who was exactly beating up on him?
Just the two guys, the black male in the front and then also the one in the back.
And did you see anything in the hands of the black male in the front?
Yes,
What did
The-
he have in his hands?
it was a handgun, a black handgun.
Okay, and where was
And
that pointed at?
he was also using it to hit him.
Okay, so it was being used to strike the person in the back seat, is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay, and so the person in the back seat that was being struck, eventually what happened with that person?
He somehow ended up getting out of the vehicle, and we had thought that was it, but he ended up getting on top of the vehicle after.
She testified shortly after she heard a gunshot and saw the very same car speeding off. Another witness described a woman driving, but also the front passenger with a gun.
Give any description of that front seat passenger.
Not a direct, I mean, I couldn't point out facial hair, tattoos, or piercings or anything, but he was just a black male.
Black male,
Yeah.
and obviously you just stated, and I'll just need to ask, could you even tell the age? If you can,
Yeah, no.
okay. And when you're observing this front seat passenger, black male with the gun, you said he was, what was he doing? How was, if he's in the passenger seat up there?
Yeah.
And Your Honor, may I just stand here and
Yes.
demonstrate to the jury, you're that black male with the gun and there's a driver, is that correct?
Yeah, there was a female driver.
A female driver?
Yeah.
And so that I'd be right next to you. So if I'm that female driver and you're that black male with the gun,
Mm-hmm.
do you remember which hand he was using, or if you recall?
Right.
His right hand?
Yeah.
Show the jury what that black male with the gun was doing.
Initially I saw, what I did see, he was reaching over like to the back, swinging it and like trying to intimidate somebody that was back there that they were trying to get a control over or something. I'm not sure.
So in the back seat.
In the back seat, yeah.
And so you're saying swing, was the person leaning or was he turned around? How was that individual?
The gun was in his right hand and he was just reaching over, like, you know.
And could you tell if it was any passengers in the back seat?
I believe I saw two individuals. There might have been three.
The 911 calls added another layer. The bullets came from the passenger side.
I just witnessed a gun shooting.
Oh, what, ma'am? Hello?
Hello?
Hello, ma'am, where are you?
It's Jones Maltzberger and 410 by the Chick-fil-A in Joanne South.
On 14 or Jones
On the
Mountain?
hood of,
And I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Jones Maltzberger and 410.
Okay. What's going on?
The guy on the hood of a car that was driving, and they pulled into the Chick-fil-A parking lot, and the passenger shot his gun at the guy on the hood. I can tell you that the windshield of the car is shattered because the guy, it looked like hit the windshield also, so.
So he
it's
shot,
someone with
like,
a-
so he like shot through the window?
Yeah, it looks like he hit the window when he shot her.
Okay, and it was a black sedan, right?
Yes.
Now, this was all on day 1 of trial. Now remember, Tay-K was already found guilty in his first murder trial, so he's already serving a 55-year sentence. But if he's found guilty in this case, it's an automatic sentence of life in prison. If Tay-K is found guilty in this trial out of Bexar County, it does come with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. If you want to watch gavel-to-gavel coverage, head over to our Law and Crime Trials channel. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.